Hello, and we are here again for some updates for standard format decks. And upon checking some of the recent MTG tournaments done online and also for face-to-face game setup, we bring you some of the new or probably updated deck archetypes that are still existing in the standard metagame. And see, here is one of the recently first placer deck from a tournament from the MTG Online Challenge 32. So this is the Dimir Aggro that is now involved with the new cards from the Murders of Carlo Manor. So you can check, we'll see the list. So we have 18 creatures, 5 artifacts, only sorcery in the main deck. We have 25 lands, 9 instants, 2 battles, and of course the 15 card sideboard. So what this deck has somewhat improved in its build, as you can see here, are the new cards Cryptic Coat and Lazab, Wither of Faces. As you can see, we can check that it is still becoming that of a tempo aggro deck that still goes with carving out some 1-drops and 2-drops, and later on going wide with some of these efficient black creatures with Geeks, Yawgmoth Praetor, and Shouldered Apocalypse. Let's just check out what the new cards does. We can see Cryptic Coat is a 3-2 cast artifact equipment that enters the battlefield, cloak the top card with your library, and then attach Cryptic Coat to it. The creature becomes unblockable or can be blocked with an additional +1/+0 in its power, and you can also pay 2 to return Cryptic Coat to its owner's hand. So it's like a Butterskull effect, except that cloaking the top card with library can be that of efficient because of several creatures here that can be just revealed up or face up by paying their mana cost. So in other way, you can just have this one as a 2/2 detective, and it becomes 3/2 and can be blocked, which is also a very efficient attacker by its setup. That's why it's now one of the probably on-demand cards in the set, and it really fits well in this kind of deck setup. And of course, it also comprises with the ability of or that of the curve of Subterranean Schooner that can also give the cloak creature +1/+1 if able to crew it on the schooner, and then it reveals a non-land card. So with that setup, again, we check on several default creatures now if you could compare with your build, and as can act as a guide if you're trying to build a Dimir Aggro deck. So we need, of course, 4 copies to Spyglass Siren, which can also create you a map token, at the same time gets you a 1/1 flyer. At the same time, we need also hand disruption, so we have 4 copies of Deep Cavern Bat to do that function or role in this deck. And much more of the efficiency of this build would be that of the inclusion of the Lazab Wither Faces. So Lazab here does is that when it attacks, you can exile target card from a graveyard and then investigate. So whenever you sacrifice a clue, that is the clue token generated from the investigate ability, you may have Lazab become a copy of a creature card exiled with it until end of turn. So in a way, you can basically have some tricks in a way that depends on, of course, the creature cards from your opponent's graveyard, for example. But depending on your own, you can also have similar of these cards that are somewhat efficient in terms like the Ledger Shredder that can become a copy, or Geeks that can also have Lazab as a copy of it, and of course the Shouldered Apocalypse. And that would also depend on how you would play out this ability, but having also a clue token on your board would also mean that you can have some cardo effects to use in the mid game up to the late game. At the same time, you can also exile relevant creature cards from your opponent graveyard, and also even non-creatures that can become a threat later on, depending on what that deck does in that kind of gameplay. Now for the in addition for the 2-drops, we have of course again Ledger Shredder that can also have you to connive as you cast or a player casts their second spell each turn. As you can see here, we have several 1-offs, and you can see that the curve is pretty much below to have a Ledger Shredder to do its function and have its ability very applicable in this build. And we have 3 copies of Geeks, Yawgmoth Praetor for card effects, so that creatures, mostly creatures that deal damage to your opponent or combat damage, such as that of the cloak creature by cryptic code and can't be blocked would also get you to draw a card and lose 1 life. And of course, with Shouldered Apocalypse in play, that draws a card would also get you a benefit. Instead of losing 1 life, you will get to only only gain 2 life for that drawback, and of course gain 1 life by -2, minusing 2, -1. And with that kind of setup for your creatures, again we have some support here in the form of cut downs. Of course, we really need to have a 1 mana cost spot removal in the deck, 4 copies of Go for the Throat, and only 2 copies of Make Disappear, as you know that Cavern of Soul would not be, the most played, or one of the new cards that's played in some of the top tier decks in the metagame. Hence, countering would not be really efficient, especially that you're naming Angel for Atraxa, so countering them would not have this Make Disappear inefficient. So in that setup, we have also 2 copies of Invasion of Amonkhet. As you can see here, it is an ability that can mill 3 cards for each player, and then each opponent discard a card and you would also draw a card. And if you would be able to flip it, you can become a last step convert that can also enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature card in a graveyard, except that it is become a 4/4 black zombie in addition to its other types. So with that kind of sort of disruption and also board and card advantage, we also go to the only sorcery in the deck, which is the Xyz command that can also do a lot of things. Sacrificing the best creature with the highest power for your opponent, you can also wipe up the board in case of certain scenarios, or you can return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. And also having a Shouldered with lifelink for that turn would also be very efficient against some of the aggro decks. And for the land setup, since we're still using some of the typical blue-black lands for mana fix, so we have Darkslick Shores for blue-black check lands. We have a single copy of Field of Ruin, maybe for the manland matchup. Of course, islands, basic lands were also considered here. 2 copies of Mirrex. So Mirrex here would also be relevant in the mid game, and since you are only 2 colors, you can also add 1 mana of any color as it comes to play. And of course, channel lands to do the ability of bouncing with Otawara, and of course, mana lands are also considered in this build, along with some mana fix late game value. So remember that you're just blue-black, and having also a lot of this mana fix would not really be a problem for this kind of deck build. Now when we go for the sideboard, we have a few new choices here aside from the usual of the cut downs, of additional cut downs, and of course counter spell against mid-range and control decks. We have a copy here of Dim's Still of Oil. So this does that you can choose an artifact and a creature card from it, from your opponent's hand, and then choose an artifact or creature card from your graveyard and then exile those cards. So in a way, also any graveyard shenanigans would also matter here, wherein you can just have them discard those cards at 2 cards, basically 2 cards for 1 value for this sorcery spell sideboard. That is also for a control. We have Duress, and this Beautiful Stroke again. Licensors maybe for these new decks that relies on graveyard shenanigans. I think the new Speaks deck might be the best target for this. Also from that, for maybe for the Mirror, Dimir Aggro, and also Mono Blue Mentor would also be a good target for the Hearse to remove from their graveyard. And of course, 3 copies of Glistening Deludes, as 3 copies is also added for Boros Convoke matchups. And additional Standbinder would also be useful for Domain and also for Dimir Aggro decks, and also shut down most of their creatures and triggered ability or activated ability. And of course, Aklasots as a lone copy in the sideboard for an efficient attacker mid-game and late game, and can also have your opponent discard a card and create an army of bot tokens in the process. And what is very resilient is that when it dies, it can return transform as a Temple of the Dead, which can also transform back if a player has only 1 of your cards in their hand. And of course, additional Xyz command for any support card that can wipe up board and also do some other helpful spells such as recursion of your creatures, and of course a single copy of Bird of Persistence for more of the mid-range and domain matchup. So that's the main deck entirely. Let's check the mana cost. It's surprisingly low with 2.23, average of 17 for 2, and white is 8. Color distribution, we can see that we are mostly with the black within the 7, blue is 18, but color producers for black and blue are evenly distributed. Now for the tokens and extras, we still have the black token, the clue token, and more of the map token and the prediction mind token from the Mirex. So I guess that is it for this deck. I think it is faced a lot of top tier archetypes, as it has won that MTGO Challenge 32 in that certain matchup, which make it still probably one of the best deck now in the current standard format metagame with MKM or Murders at Carlo Manor. So pretty much it for this deck tech. Any comments, suggestions, or any deck discussion as we can have for this, we can just comment them below on the comment box. Let's have a good discussion and sharing of ideas for this deck, as we might be facing it or against it or playing it in your next standard tournament. Thank you guys for watching on this.